The first time Marin Holloway stood behind my chair, I drew a line so crooked, it looked like the building was having a personal crisis. She didn't say anything right away. That was worse. Marin had this habit of going quiet while she thought, the kind of quiet that made the whole room aware it was happening. Then she reached past my shoulder, not touching me, close enough that I caught the clean cedar scent of her, and tapped the corner of my screen with one finger. That load-bearing wall is 12 inches off. I looked at the screen. The wall was 12 inches off. I can fix that, I said. I know. She straightened and walked back to her desk, like she hadn't just watched my spatial reasoning evaporate in real time. I was Blake Carson, 28, a designer at Vantage, a commercial interiors firm in Denver, Colorado. My job was to translate ideas into buildable space, which meant I spent most of my day measuring, adjusting, and arguing politely with contractors over load tolerances. I was decent at it, usually. Marin Holloway, our senior creative lead, had a gift for making usually feel very far away. I'd been at Vantage for 8 months. In that time, I had watched Marin talk a client out of putting neon signs in a children's hospital lobby, convince our director to greenlight a project budget 3 times higher than his comfort zone, and eat lunch at her desk every single day while reading actual physical books, because, in her words, screens are non-negotiable at work. Lunch is still mine. She had opinions about everything: traffic flow, sight lines, the specific shade of white that reads warm versus sterile on a north-facing wall. She was the kind of person who made me work harder just by being in the room. She was also the person I had been quietly, inconveniently, professionally, inadvisably in love with for the better part of 6 months. I had rules about this. I'd learned them the hard way at my first job in Boulder, where I'd misread friendliness for something else, said something, and spent 3 months being the office cautionary tale. So now I had a policy. Don't assume. Don't act on anything you haven't seen twice. Don't ruin a good working dynamic for something that probably only exists in your own head. Marin made every one of those rules feel like a suggestion by Wednesday. "You're doing it again," said Fern from the desk beside mine. Fern was our project coordinator, 25, aggressively perceptive, and had appointed herself my emotional barometer without my consent. "Doing what?" I said. "The thing where you look at her desk like it owes you a conversation. I'm reviewing the load wall. The load wall is on your computer. Marin is not." I turned back to my screen. "Mind your own spatial analysis." That's not a sentence, but she was already smiling. The project that changed things was a rebrand for a regional bank, headquartered in Fort Collins. They wanted their branches to feel less like a 1998 waiting room and more like somewhere a person under 40 might voluntarily enter. 11 locations, a hard deadline, a budget that was real but not comfortable. Our director, Dale, paired me with Marin because I handled the technical drawings and she handled the narrative. The "why does this feel the way it feels" part of the design. The first time we met to go over the floor plans, Marin pulled her chair around to my side of the table, instead of sitting across from me. "I can't read upside down," she said. "Most people just rotate the page." I'm not most people. I had noticed. She looked at me then, one of those level, measuring looks she had, and I focused very carefully on the floor plan. We were good at working together. That was the problem. With some people, collaboration is a negotiation. With Marin, it was closer to a conversation. She'd push an idea forward, I'd extend it, she'd redirect, I'd follow without feeling like I was losing ground. By the second week, I knew her coffee order without being told. Oat milk cortado, no sweetener, which I'd described as a drink that had made a philosophical commitment. She'd accused me of noticing too much. She wasn't wrong. I noticed everything about her and had been doing my best to act like I didn't. The afternoon things almost shifted was a Tuesday in October. We were alone in the small conference room on the 3rd floor, the one with the east window that went golden around 4 o'clock. Marin was reviewing material samples spread across the table. Textured concrete panels, warm oak veneer, a brushed brass fixture sample the size of a paperback. "This one," she said, sliding the brass toward me. "Tell me what it says." "Expensive." "Try again." I picked it up, turned it over. "Old money that's been renovated. Solid. Not trying too hard. She looked up. Something changed in her expression, not dramatic, just a shift, like a room getting 3 degrees warmer. That's exactly right, she said quietly. We were closer than we'd been before. I don't know how that happened. Maybe she'd leaned in to look at the sample. Maybe I'd turned toward her without thinking. The afternoon light was doing something specific to the color of her hair, which was a thought I immediately filed under none of your professional business, Carson. Marin, I said. For the lobby, 2 sconce heights or 1. She let out a slow breath. 2. The first impression should have a decision built into it. She was right, obviously. She was right about things the way gravity was right. Not debatable, just present. Then Dale knocked on the open door, and the room reshuffled. Good, you're both here. He came in with his tablet, wearing that specific blend of optimistic and slightly terrified that meant client news. The Fort Collins CEO wants to present the Phase 1 concept to her board personally. She's requesting a formal pitch deck by Thursday evening. Marin's arms crossed. That's 3.5 days. Yes. And who's presenting to the board? Dale looked between us. You two built the whole concept. You know it better than anyone. A pause. Also, Graham is out with a knee thing. Graham was supposed to present. Graham had a voice made for investor relations and almost no creative input on this project. His absence was, privately, not a tragedy. Fine, Marin said. We'll need access to the full render package. Already sent. Dale nodded and left, and for a moment the conference room held that particular quality of silence where 2 people have just agreed to something more complicated than it appeared. Marin started collecting samples. We should start on the narrative section tonight. It's 6:30. Is that a no? It's an observation. Noted. She stacked the samples with her usual precision. I'll order food. Ty placed 2 blocks over. I'm not negotiating the order. I wouldn't dream of it. We worked until 10. She built the story, the account holder, who drove 40 minutes to a branch that felt like it didn't want her there, the design principle that every space is about how much you value the person walking through the door. She made me understand exactly who we were designing for, which made every one of my decisions feel purposeful instead of arbitrary. We ate pad CU out of the containers because neither of us wanted to go look for forks. And at some point it stopped feeling like overtime and started feeling like the best part of the day. At one point she leaned back and pushed her hair out of her face and said, "You know what I actually like about design? The passive-aggressive client feedback? The problems," she said. "Every space is a problem with a specific right answer. But you can only find it by asking the right questions first. That's the least depressing way anyone has ever described this job." I contain. She stopped. I have my moments. I laughed, and she looked at me like she wasn't sure what to do with that, and then she smiled. Her real one, not the controlled version, and went back to the deck. The next morning, Fern appeared at my desk before I'd finished my first cup of coffee. Craig Vance reached out to her, she said, skipping the greeting entirely. Who? Marin. Craig Vance runs a boutique studio in Chicago, Apex. They're an architectural digest twice a year. I kept my face neutral. When? She was on the phone in the stairwell yesterday. Creative director position. Fern looked at me steadily. She hasn't said yes. Or no. I'm just telling you what I know. She went back to her desk. I thought about it all morning. Marin, creative director in Chicago. The title fit her the way good design fit a space, so naturally you almost missed how deliberately it had been put there. If she left, Vantage would be noticeably smaller. That was an objective assessment. It had nothing to do with the way the third-floor conference room felt different when she wasn't in it. That afternoon, I found a granola bar on my keyboard, sticky note in her handwriting, "Eat something." The Revit files are not a food group. I sat with it for longer than made sense. The evening before the pitch, we ran the deck in the main conference room for a small audience of coworkers. Marin opened with the story. I followed with the spatial logic. We had found a rhythm over 3 days that made the transitions feel seamless. She set the emotional frame. I gave it structure. Afterward, Dale said it was going to close the deal. Marin inclined her head and said the deck thanked him. When the room cleared, she stayed to pack up her materials. I was pulling on my jacket when she said, without turning around, "Sleep tonight. You overthink when you're tired." "I don't overthink. You remeasured the fixture placement 4 times yesterday. That's thoroughness. That's what overthinking calls itself in professional settings." She picked up her bag. "Good night, Blake." Nobody at Vantage used my first name consistently. Hearing it from her did something specific to my chest that I chose not to examine too closely on a public floor. I made it to the lobby before I checked my phone. Unknown number. "Before you present with Marin tomorrow, look up what happened at Clover and Reed. Ask why she left." I read it twice. Then I put my phone in my pocket, walked to the elevator, wrote it down, crossed the lobby, made it through the front door, and turned around. She was still in the building. I caught her through the interior stairwell window, phone to her ear, the specific tension in her shoulders that meant the conversation was difficult. I waited. When she pushed through the door into the lobby, she saw me and stopped. "You forget something," she said. I held out my phone. She read the message, looked at the floor for a moment. When she looked up, her expression was level, but something behind it wasn't. "What do you want to know?" "Whatever you want to tell me." She looked at me for a beat. "Come back upstairs." The third-floor conference room again. The building quieter now. Denver had gone dark outside the east window and lit itself back up, that particular orange-blue combination of streetlights and mountain sky that I'd come to think of as the city's specific color at night. Marin sat on the edge of the table, not in a chair. It was the first time I'd seen her do something without being deliberate about it. "Clover and Reed was a firm here in Denver," she said. "They did a mixed-use development in the Capitol Hill corridor. I was the primary designer on the residential interiors, lobbies, common areas, unit layouts. 2 years of my life in that project." I said nothing. I let her find the pace. "There's a skylight in the main lobby. Angled, west-facing, so the light moves through the afternoon. I designed it." She paused. "Craig Vance was the director at Clover and Reed. He got the project into my hands, and at first he was good at it, gave real feedback, challenged the direction in ways that made it better. Then the client started responding well, and the attention shifted. He took credit," I said. "He presented my concepts as team concepts, then as his concepts. At a regional conference, he described himself as the creative driver of the lobby design." Her jaw tightened. "I have emails showing the design was mine from the first draft. I filed a complaint with the partners." "What happened?" "They told me attribution at the director level was standard, that I'd been part of a collaborative process." She said the last 3 words with careful flatness. I left. The granola bar, the way she watched sight lines in every room she entered, the precision she used as armor. It arranged itself differently now. "He's the one offering you the Chicago job," I said. "He's consulting at Apex. He said the director role would be different, that he's changed." She looked at her hands. "He texted me today to tell me that my working closely with you, on the pitch specifically, was making me look distracted, that it was exactly the pattern from before." I was quiet for a moment. "He sent me that message." She looked up. "Same architecture," I said. "You're doing good work with someone, getting close to something real, and he makes sure there's doubt planted on both ends before anything can take root." I waited to see if it landed wrong. Marin stared at me. Then something in her shoulders shifted, some weight that had been held very carefully for a very long time. "You don't know that for certain," she said. "I'm almost certain, but I don't need certainty to tell you I believe you." She looked at me like I'd said something in a language she used to speak and hadn't heard in a while. "I do have the emails," she said quieter. "I know, I didn't need them first." The AC hummed. Somewhere down the hall, the elevator dinged for nobody. "Craig expects you to pull back," she said finally. "Distance yourself before the pitch. That's not a strategy I'm interested in." Blake. "Yeah. I haven't said yes to Apex." "I know. I haven't said no either." "I know that too." She looked at me across the dim conference room, and I wasn't hiding anything I'd been hiding for 6 months. and I think she could see that. I like working with you, she said. Careful, specific. That's not nothing. No, I said, it isn't. She picked up the brass fixture sample that had ended up in here. She carried it sometimes without seeming to notice and turned it in her hands. Solid. Not trying too hard, she said softly. That's what you said. That's what you saw. We stayed another hour, not running the deck. We knew the deck. She told me about her apartment in Cap Hill, 3 blocks from the Clover and Reed building, how she'd rented it specifically so she could come past the lobby with the skylight she'd designed and see it every morning without owing anyone else credit for it. I told her about driving up from Albuquerque in a pickup that overheated twice, arriving in Denver with everything I owned and no particular plan, choosing this city, because the altitude felt like a decision rather than a default. She told me she'd won a student design award at 22 and cried in a bathroom immediately after because she hadn't expected anyone to vote for her. I told her I'd quit the guitar after 1 semester of college because I was mediocre at it and couldn't stand being mediocre at something I loved. So you picked design, she said. Where being aggressively average for a few years before anyone noticed was still an option. She laughed, the real one, not the workplace version. It was shorter and more sudden, and it made me understand what people meant when they said someone's whole face changed. At the door, coat on, she said, if Craig tries anything tomorrow, I don't want you running interference. Okay. I mean it. Stand beside me, not in front of me. Understood. She tilted her head. You agreed too quickly. You described the only approach that would actually work. The almost smile. Good night, Blake. Good night, Marin. The pitch was at 2 the following afternoon in a Fort Collins conference room that smelled like new carpet and institutional ambition. The bank CEO Ellen Cho sat at the head of the table with her board arranged around her. 8 people, plus 3 from the bank's external consulting group. Craig Vance was one of them. Marin saw him the same second I did. Her pace shifted, not stopped, just recalibrated, the way she moved when she was reassessing a space she hadn't planned for. He smiled at her like they were old friends. Marin, I heard you were leading this one. Craig. She set her portfolio on the table without breaking stride. I didn't know you were consulting with First Meridian. Brought in last week. He glanced at me briefly. You must be the spatial designer. Blake Carson. Good work on the renders, he said, in the exact tone people use when they want to acknowledge something without crediting it. Marin set up the deck. I watched her hands, steady, unhurried. She'd been in some version of this room before. She opened with the story. The customer who drove 40 minutes to a branch that felt like it didn't want her there. The principle that every designed space is a decision about how much you value the person walking through the door. She had the room in under a minute. Ellen Cho leaned forward. 2 board members put their phones down. She handed it to me with a look that said your turn, and I walked them through the material logic, the flow analysis, the fixture decisions, and why each one supported the experience she'd described. I kept it clear. Marin had built a room with language, and I wasn't going to bury it in measurement data. When we finished, Craig raised his hand with the ease of a man accustomed to that gesture carrying weight. It's a compelling presentation, he said, but the feeling is safe. For a rebrand to register nationally, you need tension, edges, something that creates urgency. Marin turned to face him without hesitation. Tension in financial retail environments increases perceived wait time and reduces return visits. We reviewed post-occupancy data from 12 comparable rebrands. She clicked to a slide. Warmth and clarity consistently outperform provocation across every metric we measured. Craig smiled at her the way someone smiles when they want a room to see them as patient. Marin has always preferred the soft approach. It's a stylistic thing. The table went slightly still. Ellen Cho looked at Craig, then at Marin. I stepped forward. These aren't style preferences. They're tested outcomes. I moved through to the data section. Completion rates, return visits, loyalty enrollment numbers. If the board wants to go granular, we can go granular. I clicked once. The chart appeared. This is what urgency language delivers versus what this approach delivers, measured over 18 months in comparable markets. Craig said nothing. Ellen studied the slide. Then, what I appreciate, she said, is that you've given me reasons, not just a direction. We left Fort Collins at 5:15 with a verbal commitment and a request for a formal contract in her email before we reached the highway. In the parking lot, Marin walked beside me without speaking until we got to my car, and then she stopped and turned around. How did you know to pull the behavioral data? She said. You added that slide last night. I figured it was there for a reason. She looked at me. You memorized my additions. I memorized the whole deck, all of it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped forward and took my hand. Not urgently, not reaching for rescue. Just her fingers folding over mine, deliberate and warm, like a measurement she'd been holding in her head and was finally setting down. I'm not taking the apex position, she said. My voice came out level. Marin, don't decide because of. I'm not deciding because of today. A pause. Not only because of today. She looked at our joined hands. I have a skylight in my neighborhood, a project I care about. And there's a person in my office who memorizes the things I add to a deck at 11 at night and doesn't need me to explain why I added them. That's a very specific set of reasons, I said. I'm specific about things. I've noticed. She looked up at that, and I watched the almost smile finally finish itself. All the way, nothing held back. I've been waiting for you to say something for about 4 months, she said. You could have said something. I was testing a theory. For 4 months. I wanted to be sure. She tilted her head. Are you going to do something about this, or should I keep providing data points? I brought our joined hands up slowly. She watched me do it without moving away. Is dinner a data point? I said. Dinner is a beginning. We found a small Italian place off the main street. Cloth napkins, handwritten specials board, noise level low enough that the conversation belonged only to us. She ordered the gnocchi and gave me half without asking. I told her about the anonymous message, and she told me she'd already reported it to Vantage's HR contact that morning as a potential harassment concern, before the pitch, before any of this. You moved fast, I said. I've done this before, she said, and there was something dry and tired in it that made me want to say something specific. The skylight, I said. Anyone who looked up when they walked into that lobby would know who designed it. She looked across the table at me. Buildings don't have bylines. No. But people who look up when they walk into a room notice things differently than people who don't. She set down her fork, reached across the table. Her fingers found mine, less tentative this time, like a decision already made. You look up, she said. Every time. We drove back to Denver under a sky that had gone brittle cold with altitude, the specific October cold that feels like it's trying to tell you something. At her car in the Vantage lot, she turned to face me, one hand still in mine. I don't know exactly what this is yet, she said, but I'm done pretending it's nothing. So am I. She reached up with her free hand and adjusted my jacket collar, the same precision she used on everything that mattered to her. Except this time she left her hand there. Blake. Yeah. If I kiss you, it's not a work decision. Good, I said. Keeping them separate has been genuinely exhausting. She laughed, and then she kissed me. Unhurried, the way Marin did everything that counted. When we pulled back, she was still smiling, the full version, nothing withheld. And I decided it was my favorite thing I'd seen in 8 months at Vantage. We have to file a disclosure with HR, she said. Monday. I have the template. Of course you do. She kissed me again, lighter, and stepped back. Good night, Blake. Craig Vance declined his consulting contract with First Meridian the following week. Marin said she had no specific knowledge of the reason. Her expression when she said it was perfectly professional. Ellen Cho signed the full engagement in November. 11 branches, 18 months, our names on the project lead line. The office found out about us the way these things always travel. Not through an announcement, but through the slow accumulation of 2 people no longer performing a distance they didn't feel. Dale had us sign a disclosure form with the expression of a man trying to be neutral about something that made him relieved. Fern said finally, and then immediately looked at her computer screen. By February, the first branch renovation was underway. We drove up to Fort Collins on a Tuesday to walk the space, raw, framed out, the bones of our drawings now standing in 2x4s and rough concrete. Marin stood in what would become the main lobby and tilted her head back to look at the ceiling, where a skylight aperture had been roughed in. It had been my addition to the spec 3 months into the project. I'd put it in late one night in the third-floor conference room, without saying anything about it. "You put that in," she said, not an accusation, something she was working out. "You said a space should make a decision for the person in it." She looked at the aperture for a long moment, then at me. "You added that in October," she said, "before Fort Collins, before any of this." "Yeah." Before I said anything. "Yeah." She crossed the rough poured floor and stopped in front of me. She looked up, at me, not the ceiling. "Blake Carson." Marin Holloway. She grabbed the front of my jacket, pulled me down, and kissed me in the middle of a building that wasn't finished yet. Standing in the place where, in 3 months, the afternoon light would fall exactly the way she'd always said it should. 9 months after that first crooked line she'd corrected, I came home to the apartment we'd moved into, together. Her framed prints finally on the walls, my drafting table wedged into a corner because she'd insisted I needed it, and then immediately complained about the footprint. To find her at the kitchen table, barefoot, hair loose, sketching in one of her notebooks, Sunday concept work. Sometimes it became something real. Sometimes it stayed in the notebook. Either way, she looked like herself in a way that still caught me off guard. She looked up. "You're staring." "I'm studying the sight lines." She held out one hand without putting the pencil down. I crossed the room and took it. She pulled me down and kissed me under the warm kitchen light, easy and unhurried, the way we did most things by now. On the table beside her notebook, the brass fixture sample from the Fort Collins project sat on a cork trivet, catching the late afternoon light. She'd kept it. I'd never asked why. I didn't need to. I noticed things, so did she. After a while, that turns out to be how you build something that holds.